All right, this is 11 honors, and we're reviewing the slideshow, the PowerPoint on Mark Twain. And you should know this story. This isn't so important, but that is. I mean, it's an important book, but for you to remember, Tom Sawyer would be, of course, Huck fan, you know the publishing date, and where he died, where he was born, where he died. Most people know he's from Missouri, but they don't know that he died there. We did stop here, but just some names of books that you should be familiar with, because I hope you will read more than one book by Mark Twain. So there are also some bad things in his life. So here are some of those bad things. He lived to see the death of his son at 18 months, 2 daughters and his wife. So literally he outlived his entire family. 1 son and 2 daughters and his wife. That can't be easy. You would expect your sons and daughters to outlive you. And most women, it's just, I think, statistically true. You ladies have a chance of living longer than your future husbands. This was a serious thing that happened to him late in his life, and I don't know how he overcame that, but somebody had invented a printing press that Mark Twain had put a lot of money into the development of, and before he could actually get it patented, somebody beat him to it. So somebody got the patent before he could get it. So all the money that he had sunk into the development of this and its production were lost. And so he experienced that whole business failed. And by the time he died, he had developed a cynical, deterministic philosophy later in life. Cynical means pretty negative. Some of the later stuff that he wrote is pretty dark. I don't know where that is. I hope I can remember it. But he didn't publish this story, but Life Among the Indians was a novel he was working on when he died, and it was never published. So somewhere in the 60s or late 60s, it was the fragment that existed was published. And I read it, and it was pretty dark. It was about Indians, and it was pretty realistic, maybe, view of the relationship between the white man and Indian in terms of violence. It's pretty violent. So anyway, that was what he became. All right. Just some notes about the novel. It is satirical, and you have to be a good reader to pick up satire. Satire, you know what satire is? It's making fun of something in order to change it, usually a societal issue. Clearly, slavery was a big issue, but I'll give you a list of other issues that he was making fun of. So, well, it says it right here, aristocratic privilege. Just the elite, the wealthy elite of the time. He makes fun of rich people. He makes fun of mobs. We still have mobs. I don't know if you're paying attention to the news, but they're mobs of young people primarily, and particularly in big cities like New York, Minneapolis, and several cities in California, where these mobs break in and steal. They're mobs. It's a mob mentality. And he makes fun of that here. You get several instances of mobs. Sentimentality is something he makes fun of. Or romanticism. We know about romanticism because we read a book about it, Frankenstein. We read several poems that were romantic. Con men. Two of the most interesting minor characters in the story are con men. And they also happen to be pretending to be a duke and a king, and so he makes fun of royalty. He makes fun of, hucksters, or people that are con men. And the gullibility of human nature. Why are people always falling for business deals that are phony and that they end up losing money out of? But it happens. Another thing about the use of colloquial speech and dialect. So there's a lot of, it's written by, it's spoken by a 14-year-old boy from Missouri, and so he has an accent, but then Jim has an accent, and there are various accents portrayed. He was brilliant. Mark Twain could hear accents and could transpose them into words on a page. It's written in 3 stages. So he started in 1876. He wrote, that's the year that Tom Sawyer was published. So he wrote 18 chapters. Some people consider this the best part of the book, the first 18 chapters. Then he writes, 3 years later, he writes 19 through 21, which are pretty good. I like those equally. The problem comes with, in 1883 is when he finished writing it. It was published the next year. The last, there are about 44, 43 chapters in the book, so almost half of the book, a lot of people don't consider as well written as, particularly the last 15 chapters, chapter 30 to say 43, are not as well written. And so you can kind of tell the difference when you read it. So it's interesting writing history. I don't think most books are written this way, and yet it's still we said one of the great books in American history. 3 problems with the novel. I already prepared you for this. The N-word. You have to note that it's used as casual everyday speech by blacks and whites. It is a racial word, no question about it, and we can't forget about it. It still is, and yet people use it. You know, it's used a lot in music and, you know, places like that. It's just an interesting thing, isn't it? That a word that's so detestable and it was such a bad word is now used so often by some people, but it was used, I guess, by most everybody in this day. It was just a casual word that people would use, but it was a word of deep hatred. And its use in the novel shows how deeply racism was ingrained in the language of America. So when people use words, and you know, you can think of a prominent profanity that's used. It always surprises me how it's used. Some of the profanity. It's so casual. It's so common. You know, it's just in every. I don't know. It's just bizarre to me. I think words should mean something, and yet words like this is used as if it didn't mean anything. And some of the words that you hear today, the profanity that's used, it's not even. It's hardly even profanity anymore, because it's used for almost any situation, and so it does show how deeply racism, and that's a really important part of this book, is that the real themes of the book are right under the surface. The people in the book, they don't really consider these things, but at the same time, Mark Twain is talking about these big things that the people in the book, they're not aware of. They just accept it, which we'll talk about later. Here are a couple of other problems. That was one of the problems, the use of the N-word. Another problem is the betrayal of Jim, and you need to know this as you read it. Some people have been offended by Jim. They feel like he's a racial stereotype. I mean, you'll have to draw your own conclusions from it. Is he a real person? Does he come across as a real person? He does to me, but might not to you. And then the other problem I alluded to a minute ago, the book's final chapters, which is really chapter 30 to chapter 43, or some people consider not as good as the rest of the book. Hemingway says, if you read it, talking about the book, you must stop where Jim is stolen from the boys. That's around chapter 30, 31, and there are about 12 more chapters after that. Some people And the only reason people think it's inferior is because the plot becomes, they think, inferior. There's nothing scandalous about it at all. It just becomes kind of boring. I even see that when I'm rereading it. I can just, okay, I'm just going to skip this page. I get it. You know, it's like a joke that just it goes on too long. Some people say that about the ending of Huck Finn. You'll have to decide. We're going to read it anyway. We're going to read the ending. So those are three problems. The first one was the racial aspect, and then you got these. This is kind of racial about Jim, but it's mostly about characterization. Can I go on? All right, themes. I have a sheet already made out when we get to the end that point out the specific themes of the book. Just elaborates on this. Here's some of them. Sentimentality and romanticism is the theme of the book. Violence is a very violent time period. Slavery is the theme of the book. Freedom is a theme in the book, the opposite of slavery. The relationship of Jim and Tom, and growth and maturity. I don't know if we'll finish the book. I don't mean that. We won't finish it before Christmas, but we will finish it before the exam. So when you get the review questions or the review topics that I give you Friday, they will cover things that we haven't done yet, but we will do. So there's a lot to be said about the book. A lot of the exam could be about Huck Finn, although we will take we need to take a separate, in fact, I guess what we could do, well, we'll take a separate test on Huck Finn, and then it'll be a part of the exam. You know, the exam isn't aren't short answers. Well, they are short answers. They're not multiple choice answers. They're not true false answers. Fill in the blank. You know, the exam will be written, and they could be short answers, but it'll definitely be written. You've done it before. All right, so we need to review what realism is, but I want you to write it down. You have this somewhere, but I bet you can't find it. So I want you to be able to, when we do take a test, be able to tell me what realism is. This is the first book written in this era that we are reading, the era of realism. It's not like romanticism. Realism, well, let me just get you to write it down, and then we'll talk about it. let me do these. You need to know what pragmatism is. Do you know what it is? You ever heard the word being pragmatic? All right, I want you to define it here. Being pragmatic or pragmatism is the belief in being practical. It's a practical view of life. You see that in the character of Huck Finn, and you see the opposite of that in the character of Tom Sawyer. Huck Finn is extremely practical. There are times when he's not, but generally it's when he's with Tom. But most of the time he's very pragmatic, he's very practical. Everything is done for a practical purpose. All right, belief in democracy, emphasis on everyday experience. Now we're talking about realism. Everyday experiences, the common man, the middle class, that's what is focused on with realism. Number 4, focus on the immediate. It's not the past, it's always the present. It's what's going on now. See, romantics, they believed in the past. They would go back to the past, the Middle Ages or ancient times, and they would romanticize it, they would idealize it. But the realists would stay in the present and would talk about the ordinary experiences of regular people. Next to last one, protests the falseness of sentimentality and romanticism. So I don't know if he really felt that way, but he sure wrote about it. He did not like romanticism, anything like Frankenstein, anything like all those authors, Wordsworth and Keats and those people. We didn't read Ivanhoe, but he hated. He really didn't like Ivanhoe or Sir Walter Scott, and he didn't like Jane Austen. So he made fun of those people. And he also, that is realism. This is what he didn't like. That's what realism doesn't like. But realism is faithful to the actual. So if you had to define it, realism is a view, a writing, a philosophy that focuses on what's actually happening, not what you wish were happening or what happened in the past, but what's happening right now. All right, so very important to the story is the fact that Huck Finn is the narrator. And so these are some things that happen as a result. I'll let you write it so you can listen. All right, so these are 4 key things about him being a narrator. Huck doesn't really have opinions about things. He just observes things. And so that's why we call him a lens. He looks at life along the river during the time period, which is pre-Civil War. And he just tells us what he sees. That's what the second one points at. He doesn't comment, he only observes. But Mark Twain actually uses what he observes to give us his opinion. we'll come back to that. Number 3, he sympathizes with individuals, does not judge institutions. So Huck never once says anything really bad about slavery. So that's the institution. He never criticizes the institution of slavery. However, he does sympathize, and you might even say love, Jim, who is a slave. And he tries to free Jim from slavery. He actually does, in a way, free him. They live together. So here's one slave that he likes, and he's trying to get him out of slavery. But if you asked him what slavery, is slavery bad, he'd say no. In fact, in the book, it's interesting that he thinks his taking Jim out of slavery is a bad thing. That he thinks he's doing the wrong thing. We see it as the right thing. And then Twain satirizes aspects of society by having Huck, in his innocence, admire them. So things that Huck admires, Mark Twain probably doesn't. And so you have to read it like that. If he says something about people, he's just a 14-year-old kid. And so he doesn't know what he's talking about. All right, here's my last slide. It's just a picture of the two guys. No, it's the same guy, but it's just a picture of 1871 and then when he was older. So it was a persona that he developed, the mustache, the white hair. Sometimes he wore what we call a ice cream suit. It's that color, you know. It's not white, but it's close to it. What's the name of that? Seersucker, I think it's that sort of fabric. So anyway, that's what everybody should know. You've seen this picture before? Kind of know what he looks like. This is the young version of the same thing. I think this is the last one. All right, so I'm going to ask you to get the book out a minute. This is a book that you're going to read on your own, but I just want to start it with you, and I want to kind of give you a heads up of what you're going to read. I have a different version of it as usual. So turn to the beginning of the book. All right, so I'm actually going to read some of this with you to give you an idea. You said you've read it or a earlier version of it. Everybody, chapter 1. I want you to, I'm not going to give you the questions yet, but I do have questions for the whole book. So I would like for you to, again, write in your book. So if you have a pen, I'm going to point out some things. If you would have your pen or pencil. First of all, the story begins, what he calls St. Petersburg, Missouri, is really Hannibal, Missouri. That's where he grew up, but he calls it St. Petersburg. So I made a note of that. How do I remember that? Because I wrote it right here. And that's where you need to write it. You don't need I do have questions, but it's better if you write it in the book. All right. Can we start? You don't know me, you don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. But that ain't no matter. The book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth mainly. There was things which he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. That is nothing. I never seen anybody but lied one time or another. Without, it was Aunt Polly or the widow, maybe Mary. Aunt Polly, Tom's Aunt Polly, she is, and Mary, and the widow Douglas is all told about in that book, which is mostly a true book with some stretchers, as I said before. And I mean, almost from the beginning, if one of the things that he's talking about here is this book is mainly the truth. So I made a note that one of the things that wasn't on the board is that, the truth, or false. In other words, lying is a theme in the book. Huck is the best liar you'll ever see. He always lies. We'll have to talk about that. Why he lies and so forth. Now the way that the book winds up is this. Tom and me find the money that the robbers hid in the cave, and it made us rich. Did all of you read Tom Sawyer? Or have it? I had it. I've taught it, but it was read to us in the 4th or 5th grade, I remember. So that book ended this way. We got $6,000 apiece, all gold. It was an awful sight of money when it was piled up. Well, Judge Stafford, he took it and put it out at interest, and it fetched us $1 a day apiece all the year round, more than a body could tell what to do with. Of course, $1 a day would be, what, $365 a year. And 1850s, that's a lot of money, and that's just the interest. That doesn't count the money itself. They had $6,000 apiece, and just the interest gave them $365 a day. Tom doesn't know literally Huck doesn't know what to do with it. The widow Douglas took me for her son and allowed she would civilize me. But it was rough living in the house all the time, considering how dismal, regular, and decent the widow was in all her ways. And so when I couldn't stand it no longer, I lit out. I got into the old rags and my sugar hogshead again and was free and satisfied. But Tom Sawyer, he hunted me up and said he was going to start a band of robbers. And I might join if I could go back to the widow. If I would go back to the widow and be respectful. So I went back. You see even that theme about freedom is in the first. He introduces that. He doesn't want to live in the house with Ms. Watson and the widow Douglas and Ms. Watson. So make sure you know those two characters. All right, the widow, she's actually the good one. He likes her better than he likes the other one. The widow, she cried over me and called me a poor lost lamb, and she called me a lot of other names too, but she never meant no harm by it. She put me in them new clothes again, and I couldn't do nothing but sweat, and I feel all cramped up. Well then, the old thing commenced again. The widow rung a bell for supper, and you had to come right away, or you had to come to Tom. When you got to the table, you couldn't go right to eating, and you had to wait for the widow to tuck down her head and grumble over the victuals, though there weren't really anything the matter with them. That is nothing, only everything was cooked by itself. In a barrel of odds and ends, it's different. Things get mixed up and the juice kind of swaps around and the things go better. So you can tell already that he doesn't enjoy living there because it cramps his freedom. And a sugar hogshead, by the way, is a barrel. He actually sleeps in a barrel when he's not sleeping in a bed. He'd rather sleep in a barrel. And I picture the barrel at its side, not standing on the end. After supper, she got out her book and learned me about Moses and the bulrushers, and I was in a sweat to find out all about him. But by and by, she let it out that Moses had been dead a considerable long time. Then I didn't care no more about him because I don't take no stock in dead people. Would you underline that? I take no stock in dead people. There are going to be so many of these, but that's an example of his pragmatism. If somebody's dead, how could it possibly affect my life? She is trying to teach him about the Bible, but when he finds out those people are dead, he has no interest in it. Pretty soon I wanted to smoke and asked the widow to let me, but she wouldn't. She said it was a mean practice and wasn't clean, and I must try to not do it anymore. That is just the way with some people. They get down on a thing that they don't even know nothing about. Here she was bothering about Moses, which was no kin to her and no use to anybody, being gone, you see, yet finding a power of fault in me for doing a thing that had some good in it. And she took snuff too, of course. That was all right because she done it herself. What is that an example of? She tells Huck not to smoke, but she takes snuff. And I've never understood. You know what snuff is? I'm not sure either. I don't know if you put it in your mouth or you literally sniff it. I don't know. But anyway, what is that an example of? She tells him not to do something that she essentially is doing herself. It's hypocrisy. That's another theme of the book. Freedom is a theme, and hypocrisy, people who say one thing but do another. Her sister, Miss Watson, a tolerable, slim old maid with goggles on, had just come to live with her and took a set at me now with a spelling book. She worked me middling hard for about an hour, and then the widow made her ease up. I couldn't stood it much longer. Then for an hour it was deadly dull and I was fidgety. Miss Watson would say, "Don't put your feet up there, Huckleberry, and don't scrunch up like that, Huckleberry. Set up straight." And pretty soon she would say, "Don't gap and stress like that, Huckleberry. Why don't you try to behave?" Then she told me all about the bad place, and I said I wished I was there. She got mad then, but I didn't do no harm. I didn't mean no harm. All I wanted was to go somewhere. All I wanted was a change. I want particular. She said it was wicked to say what I said, and she wouldn't say it for the whole world. She was going to live so that as to go to the good place. Well, I couldn't see no advantage in going where she was going, so I made up my mind I wouldn't try for it. But I never said so because it would only make trouble and wouldn't do no harm. Underline that. It would only make trouble and do no harm. That's one of Huck's philosophies of life. If you can avoid trouble, you do. You don't try to make it. You don't go out purposely trying to cause it, but you try to avoid it at all. So he tries to get along with people. He really doesn't have much choice. He's a 14-year-old boy. He doesn't have any parents. He has no clout, no money. Well, he does now, but he doesn't even have a family. So he has no clout in the world. Nothing that people would admire or look up to. What's wrong with his view? He says he didn't want to go to heaven because Ms. Watson was going to be there, which is kind of funny, but what does that tell us about Huck? That he would have that attitude about heaven? What do you think, Isabel?
That he doesn't take it that seriously.
And he doesn't understand it. He's uneducated. He has no idea what heaven is like. I mean, all we know is what the Bible says, but he doesn't know anything about that. So it's another aspect of his life, and I just don't have a lot of time, but let me just do one more little bit here. Now she had to start. She had got a start and went on and told me all about the good place. She said all anybody would have to do there was go around all day with a harp and sing forever and ever. Do you think that's what heaven's going to be like? We go around and sing with a harp forever and ever? I hope not. It does mention harps in heaven, and it mentions some other things, but again, it shows you his ignorance. It shows you her ignorance. So I didn't think much of it, but I never said so. I asked her if she reckoned Tom Sawyer would go there, and she said not by a considerable sight. I was glad about that because I wanted him and me to be together. So Tom is his best friend. But again, he wants to go to hell because Tom's going to be there. And then finally, Miss Watson, she kept pecking at me. And I got some tiresome and lonesome. By and by, they fetched the slaves in and had prayers. And then everybody was off to bed. I went up to my room with a piece of candle and put it on the table. Then I sat down on a chair by the window and tried to think of something cheerful, but it weren't no use. I felt so lonesome, I most wish I was dead. The stars were shining, the leaves rustled in the woods, ever so mournful, and I heard an owl way off wooing about somebody that was dead, and a whippoorwill and a dog crying about somebody that was going to die. And the wind was trying to whisper something to me, and I couldn't make out what it was, and so it made the cold shivers run over me. Then away out in the woods, I heard that kind of sound that a ghost makes when he wants to tell about something that's on his mind and can't make itself understood. And so I can't rest easy in its grave, and so can't rest easy in its grave, and has to go about that way every night grieving. So I got downhearted and scared. I did wish I had some company. Pretty soon a spider went crawling on my shoulder, and I flipped it off into the candle. And before I could budge, it was all shriveled up. I didn't need anybody to tell me that was an awful bad sign and would fetch me some bad luck. So I got scared and most shook the clothes off of me. I got up, turned around in my tracks 3 times, crossed my breast every time, and I tied up a little lock of my hair and a thread to keep witches away. But I had no confidence. You do that when you've lost a horseshoe that you found, instead of nailing it over the door. But I hadn't ever heard of anybody say that it was any way to keep off bad luck when you killed a spider. What do you notice about about Huck? He's superstitious. Make a note of that. And that's a big theme in this book as well. Superstition. So he is educated. He's just not educated in the same way that you're educated. He also is very conscious of nature. Earlier he talked about it. He loves nature. So in that sense, he's kind of a romantic. But he's not romantic about nature. He just loves it. And he's superstitious. Let me just finish the chapter, okay? Just got one paragraph. I sat down again, shaking all over. This is all because he killed a spider. So he's afraid he's got bad luck. I sat down again, shaking all over, and got out my pipe for a smoke. But the house was all as still as death now, and so the widow wouldn't know. Well, after a long time, I heard the clock away off in the town go boom, 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 12 licks, and all still again, stiller than ever. Pretty soon I heard a twig snap down in the dark amongst the trees. Something was a-stirring. I sat still and listened. Directly I could just barely hear a meow, meow down there, which was good. I say meow, meow, as soft as I could. And then I put out the light and scrambled out the window on the shed. When I slipped down to the ground and crawled in among the trees, and sure enough, there was Tom Sawyer waiting for me. So we finished one chapter. I'm going to ask you to read. See, we have a test. I'm going to do this for Monday. I'm going to ask you to read through chapter, today's Wednesday, through chapter 6 for Monday, all right? Through chapter 6. No, we don't have a test Friday. I keep getting confused. Chapter 5 for tomorrow. All right, did you get that? Can you read that overnight? It's not long, it's just about 20 pages.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't need them. Go get them from my tractor trailer.
Stop.
Go get them from my. Go get them from
I
my
feel about this?
trailer.
Who you are.
Hey.
If I don't do it like stupid.
What's up, YouTube? It's your boy.
I'll put that on for you.